She rented an Airbnb, then she found the secret basement. True story. Finding the perfect Airbnb for a weekend getaway should have been easy. Emily had spent hours scrolling through options, searching for something with a cozy vibe, close to nature, yet secluded enough to get away from the bustle of the city. After weeks of stressful work deadlines, she was looking for a much-needed break. When she stumbled upon a charming cottage on the outskirts of a small town, it seemed perfect. The listing had glowing reviews, photos of a picturesque cabin surrounded by lush woods and everything she wanted for a peaceful retreat. The owner, a kind-looking woman named Jessica, had promptly responded to her inquiry, offering helpful tips and answering questions about the area. The place was secluded, just far enough from the main road to feel like a true escape, yet still close enough to town to pick up supplies. Emily was sold. The price was right, the location perfect. She clicked book now and eagerly looked forward to her weekend getaway. Upon arriving, everything seemed as advertised, serene, quiet, and isolated. The house stood alone on a quiet hill, surrounded by trees that blocked out much of the sunlight. As she stepped inside, the old wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, and a musty scent filled the air. It was charming in a vintage way, and despite its age, the house felt warm and inviting. Emily settled in quickly. She made herself a cup of tea, picked a book from the shelf, and began to unwind. The afternoon passed slowly, the peacefulness of the place washing over her. But as night began to fall, Emily noticed something odd. The house, despite being beautiful, felt off. The air seemed thicker, the creaking of the wood louder, and there was something unsettling about the basement door, slightly ajar, in the corner of the hallway. She hadn't noticed it when she first arrived, but now it seemed almost impossible to ignore. The door led down into the basement, which wasn't mentioned in the Airbnb listing. Emily was no stranger to basements. She'd grown up with one herself. But this particular door felt like it was hiding something. She tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was just the old house settling, the darkness making her mind race. Still, something about that door nagged at her. Was there something down there? Or was it just her overactive imagination? By the time the sun set, Emily was no longer focused on her book. She found herself pacing through the house, eyes frequently darting to the basement door. There was no reason to feel scared. There was nothing to be afraid of. She told herself that again and again. But despite her best efforts to distract herself, the nagging feeling grew stronger. Around 8 p.m., Emily decided to call it a night. The peaceful quiet of the house had begun to weigh on her, and she was eager to get some rest. But as she went to the kitchen to make a late-night snack, she heard it. A faint noise like a soft tapping coming from beneath the floorboards. It stopped the moment she paused. Probably just the house, she whispered to herself. But the sound had seemed too deliberate. It was as if someone or something was trying to get her attention from below. Her mind raced. Maybe it was just an animal, or maybe it was just her imagination. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something more? Something hiding beneath the floor in that dark, unlit basement. She stood there for a moment, frozen. The air felt thick, the darkness pressing in from all sides. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts swirling in her mind. There was no reason to be scared. She was alone. Everything was fine. But then, she heard it again. The tapping was louder now, a rhythmic pattern. It wasn't a random noise. It sounded like a message. Someone or something was trying to communicate. Freaked out, Emily decided she'd go investigate. After all, it was probably nothing, maybe a pipe or an animal scratching at the floor. She reached for the flashlight she had packed in her bag, grabbed a coat for warmth, and made her way to the basement door. Her heart raced as she approached the darkened doorway. She could barely make out the bottom of the stairs in the faint light from the hallway. She hesitated for a moment, the chill in the air sending goosebumps down her arms. But her curiosity won out. With one hand on the doorknob, she slowly pushed the door open. The hinges groaned as the door creaked, and the darkness beyond seemed to swallow the light around her. The air in the basement was cold, stale, as though it had been locked away for years. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing the old wooden steps leading downward into the darkness. Emily swallowed her fear and took the first step, then the second, her foot landing softly on the wood. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own breathing. The basement seemed endless, stretching far beyond what her flashlight could illuminate. Boxes, old furniture, and what looked like unused appliances were scattered across the floor. But what caught her attention was an odd shape in the corner, a large, old-looking chest, covered with a thin layer of dust. Something about it looked out of place, almost new. Her heart skipped a beat. Emily moved closer to the chest, her curiosity overcoming her fear. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence, but the heavy feeling in the air lingered. She crouched down to inspect the chest, her flashlight revealing a strange, faint symbol carved into the wood. It was an intricate design, almost like an old sigil, something that didn't belong in a house like this. Who would leave something like this down here? She muttered under her breath, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the latch. Without thinking, she opened the chest. What she found inside made her blood run cold. It wasn't clothes or old keepsakes. Inside the chest was a pile of photographs, stacked neatly but covered in a thin layer of dust. Emily reached for the top photo, flipping it over. The first thing she noticed was the blurry image of a woman standing in front of a house that looked suspiciously like the one she was staying in. But what made her stomach lurch was the date written on the back. It was dated 6 months ago, well after the house had been listed on Airbnb. Then, Emily found another photo, and another. Each one seemed to show someone standing in the same spot outside the house, looking increasingly familiar. And there was something else. Each person had a faint, shadowy figure standing behind them, obscured and blurry, as if something was watching them. Her hands trembled as she dropped the photos, her heart racing as a terrible realization hit her. The people in the photos were all guests who had rented this house before her. But what if they hadn't left? The sound of a door creaking upstairs brought Emily's attention back to the present. Someone else was in the house. The basement door slammed shut behind her. Emily spun around, her flashlight falling from her grip. The beam of light flickered out as she backed up against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of footsteps echoed above her, slow and deliberate, getting louder with each passing second. She wasn't alone. Her thoughts raced. Was it the owner of the Airbnb? Had Jessica returned unexpectedly? But then she remembered. Jessica had told her she would be gone the whole weekend. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The footsteps grew closer, now descending the stairs into the basement. Someone was walking down slowly, methodically, as if they were savoring every moment. Emily could hear their breath, each exhale slow and deliberate like a predator stalking its prey. She had to get out, but when she tried to move toward the stairs, a voice stopped her cold. "Don't bother running, Emily, it's too late for that." In a panic, Emily rushed to the basement window. The thick glass made it almost impossible to see clearly, but she could make out the distant lights of the town. If she could just break through. She turned around. The figure was standing at the bottom of the stairs now, completely still. Emily's breath hitched in her chest as she realized the terrible truth. She was trapped. The last thing she remembered was the sound of footsteps approaching her, and the sensation of cold hands reaching out from the darkness. What would you do if you found something in your Airbnb you weren't meant to see? Would you confront the truth or would you run far away? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe for more chilling stories that will leave you questioning the safety of your next getaway.